we see there's a real market opportunity to like come with a human and developer like centered approach that really builds a product that is much more pleasant and easy to use. And every touch point from using the dashboard to using our CLI to using our APIs all have sort of that focus on like, let's make a great developer experience and a great touch point here that we know folks are going to deeply engage with.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to Scaling DevTools. Today, we are joined by not one, not two, but three guests. So we've got Jonathan, Andrew, and Brad from DevCycle and also Taplytics, which we'll get into in a second. But DevCycle is a feature flag management tool. And welcome all three of you to the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Jack.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah.
Glad to be here.
So I met Andrew at a conference and we were chatting and I realized that I'd kind of come across Taplytics a while back. I think it was like, I was like looking at different mobile dev tools and it was interesting about how you could create you could manage a lot of your app in a kind of like no code way and do a lot of other stuff as well. And this was a company that I think you were running for like 10 years or more. And is that right, Jonathan?
Yeah. We've been around for over 10 years now. Like we really came out, I guess, we did YC. It was part of the winter 14 batch. And that's actually where I met Brad. And so, yeah, we've been sort of in business since then and growing the business with all the highs and lows that come with being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And so then there's also DevCycle, which I saw that you were kind of referencing it on your site and it seemed like it was kind of this other thing that you're doing. And it sounds like a lot of, it's kind of a pivot and a lot of your attention is on DevCycle now as well.
Yeah, it's been an interesting story. So the background on Taplytics, as you kind of described, like it started off really as a mobile A/B testing, no code visual editing platform for mobile, and really grew into like a wider marketing automation and dev tool product where we were doing everything from that A/B testing to like also web no code visual editing and push notifications and audience building and like a really large suite of different kind of more marketing focused enterprise tools and really about 2.5 years ago we sort of looked at the business as a whole and we're trying to decide of like how do we accelerate our growth? Like we have all these different products and we were feeling sort of stretched thin a little bit across all the different types of products we were serving. And so we took a look at like the granular detail. We're like, who are the users who are using our product every single day for their workflows? And that was actually engineering teams using our feature flagging tools, which we kind of built as a side project on top of the A/B testing tools at Taplytics. They were using it every day to like do basically continuous deployment using feature flags. And we're like, hey, this is like a really passionate group of users using our product in a way that we didn't really foresee. And us internally, actually, we had started using feature flags daily ourselves as well. So it really lined up well to like our own processes of trying to move faster, trying to get towards continuous deployment with our product.
This was happening this was like 2017, 2018, like before feature flags as a service and feature flags as a product was really like an established market too, right? Like this is like early days of this segment.
Yeah. And then we sort of took a look at the business and we're like, all right, if we're going to focus on one thing, we're going to like, this is the market we want to focus on and dive deep into the developer tools space, building a great experience specifically for developers. And that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah. And actually that's a kind of interesting point is you said there about like, if you were going to focus on one thing, and could you talk a bit about like the pros and cons of like focusing on one thing versus something like Taplytics that has such a broad set of features?
Yeah. I think we learned some lessons of going broad early. I think as an entrepreneur, we learned a lot of those hard lessons of the context switching. You're addressing an issue for one customer in one part of your product, then you have to go context switch to another part of your product that maybe is architected differently, and that's really painful and really taxing on your engineering team. And so so that was a really hard lesson to learn as an engineering manager and as a founder, that focus, especially in the early days, but even as you're growing, is incredibly important to build a cohesive product. And really when we made the decision to really focus on DevCycle, we tried to go all in as possible. Like, obviously we're still supporting those customers and on Taplytics and have people in place to properly support them, but we wanted to give the teams that were going to build DevCycle like 100% focus on that product, and not be distracted by anything else, and have the runway to just go and build with that pure focus in mind.
Yeah. And what is like the hardest part of kind of pivoting in that sense?
There's lots of it, but the biggest thing is moving our customers over and maintaining those relationships. So the nice thing about DevCycle is that we still do the core things that people are using us on Taplytics. Like, most of our usage on Taplytics was code-based A/B testing or feature flagging, and we're able to support that much better with DevCycle. So it's an easy story to go to those existing customers, and we've been able to transition a large percentage of them over, because it's a better product in DevCycle now. But some of the use cases, like push notifications, is an area of our product we've actively told our customers we're deprecating, and so that's a harder conversation. But that's where you work with partners. So like, we've partnered up with OneSignal to help make that transition of those customers easier over to a platform that's going to support them long term. And so that was probably the most, and it still is the most delicate balance of this whole process. But and making sure that we're supporting our existing customers as best we can with, and that's something I think we've always prided ourselves on at Taplytics, is having really strong customer relations, really great account management, really strong relationships with those customers. Like, we have customers who've been with us for like over 8 years now, which is like crazy in this world of fast moving technology. And those customers are moving with us over to DevCycle because we've invested in those relationships so much.
Yeah, and it was like, were most of those relationships very much like kind of discussions, like Zoom calls, or was it more about like setting up like early communications over email and like updating the docs to say things are deprecated, or like how did you kind of manage it practically?
Yeah, practically, it certainly is a lot of Zoom calls these days, but I think we've built a lot of those relationships by having people on the ground meeting with and making personal connections with those customers. And because Taplytics is like really focused on enterprise customers, there's a smaller number of like large contracts you need to manage, where with DevCycle, we're focusing more on a product-led growth strategy and less of an enterprise focus. And so it's a bit of a different case for DevCycle, but with Taplytics, we have a really strong sort of account management team, and really, as founders, like, not so myself as the CTO, but the other founders have really focused to make sure we have those founder connections with the executives at our main customers. We have those relationships that we can leverage if needed to work through tough contract negotiations and tough conversations like this, right? And so I advise founders to be close with your biggest customers and the executives at your biggest customers. Like, never lose that connection if you're selling these larger enterprise deals.
Yeah, that's a challenging one. And how do you think about like pricing that you've moved over, like from I guess pricing's hard anyway, but like you've already got people kind of anchored to like one product that may be like completely different. And then you're kind of the same team. Was that something that was like took a lot of thinking or?
Yeah, I think we're frankly still figuring it out, because one of the core changes going from an enterprise product to a PLG product is that it's like the PLG product is comes in at a lower price bracket, right? We're trying to be more usage-based pricing versus seat-based pricing, things like that, which more aligns our costs to customers' actual usage of the product, right? There are still like enterprise levers that are common, things like permissions and SAML and special connections and things like that and all the various uptime guarantees and SLAs and things like that you can build enterprise contracts around. And so those transition contracts are still built around the same general enterprise mechanics. But most of our focus of pricing is focusing on how do we get those mid-market companies that are just going to sign up for the product and start using it, get them onboarded at a reasonable rate. And maybe Brad can jump in on that.
Yeah, I think it's also challenging when you're coming down market from sort of an enterprise focus to kind of like a mid-level market. Your decision maker becomes a lot more technical in most cases. So we're talking to engineering teams, we're talking to engineering directors, we're talking to engineering leads, who are making the decision to bring in platforms like ours, or even like, any platform or any developer facing platform in that sense. And so the conversation around pricing tends to come up a lot sooner. And also, I don't want to say there's more sensitivity to it, because that's not necessarily the case, but there certainly is like more awareness to it, right? Like, I think that if you're a developer, particularly if you're a developer or technically minded, when you look at pricing, or when you're assessing a tool for the first time, you kind of perform this like gut check on pricing. Like, who doesn't check a pricing page in sort of their first interaction with the product? And it's not, you're not necessarily looking at the mechanics and being like, okay, what exactly is this going to cost me? You want to kind of get a sense of like, is this priced for me or not, right? Like, is this priced for my business and my team for the stage that we're at? What language is being used? What features are being offered? Do things scale on usage? Do things scale on seats? Those sorts of questions come to mind. And so the actual dollar amount is less relevant, we're sort of learning. And it's more about like, how do we position pricing for developers? And I think that's kind of like a unique skill that we've kind of figured out how to do a little bit. And we're still learning a lot.
Yeah, that's actually super interesting. It's like that whole like transition of suddenly like you're speaking to different people, the conversations are going differently, communications are different. Is it something that's like, like old habits die hard? Like, is it like if you're kind of like a salesperson that's like used to like building relationships with like the very, senior people, and suddenly like you're going after a different audience, is it something that like you have to be how have you thought about that change kind of?
I think it's interesting, and I'll let Jonathan chime in here as well, but I think the biggest change that I'm aware of is especially when you're selling to more technical teams and developer facing teams, it's really hard to sort of force timelines, right? Like when you're doing like sort of traditional enterprise sales, we can do things like, we'll give you a 25% discount if you sign annually. We can, if we can get this deal closed in the next 2 weeks, we can do some extra things. But when your product is, essentially an API or it's infrastructure based, you can't really force timelines on anyone. And that's okay. That's okay, right? It's like what you want to do is you want to understand where folks are at in their timeline and where their technical needs are, and figuring out how we can help. And so I think that's a relatively large shift in sort of the mental sales model that I think we've navigated it really well. But we've had to navigate it very intentionally, if that makes sense. We've had to make our team very aware of like, okay, we need to work with our customers and their roadmap and their technical priorities and make sure that we're fitting into what they're doing rather than trying to drive just sales for the sake of sales.
Yeah. I feel like that's why, like, in such a big way, DevCycle has really doubled down on, like, we believe in developer relations and, like, that relations part being the thing, like relationships. Jonathan was talking about it earlier, right? Building those relationships with enterprise customers is like one of these ways that we've been able to sort of transition folks over to the DevCycle platform. And I think as a company internally, and externally, like as part of this transition, so much of that conversation has been like, let's focus on relationships. And like through that, all of these other great things are going to come. And we're going to really take the time to invest in the folks that are coming over to not only use our platform, but to just engage with us, to really sort of move the needle in a different direction than it might go if we were, say, just really trying to sell to developers. And I think that's why DevRel exists, right? Like this industry did not exist like 10 years ago because dev tools were just not in the place that they were. And now you've got a whole group of people whose entire job it is just to like build relationships with the developers. And that's such a unique piece, I think, of what we've kind of done as part of this transition is really sort of go all in on relationship building with people.
Yeah, for our sales team, it's been a big shift because they now have to think about, instead of enterprise sales, like, yes, we still have inbound enterprise interests that will go through that standard enterprise sales process, but the majority of their time is focusing on what's called product-led sales, where they're looking at how people are using the product and reaching out to them at the times where we can see that, okay, like they've deployed this to production. They're getting value out of the product. Like now is the time to have the conversation with them, figure out who's the right person to have the conversation with about what a contract looks like, right? It's not about like everyone who signs up for the product gets like blasted with emails and phone calls right away. It's like you need to have your product lead and create that hook of interest and in usage of the product, and then you can engage in that conversation about like, all right, here's what a discounted contract might look like, or something. Here's what the enterprise features might look like if you're interested in them, and that I think has been a big shift that we're obviously still working through.
Yeah, and could you talk a bit about like how you like the kind of like practical things you're doing to kind of build these relationships and this kind of like product-led growth?
Yeah, I think that's tricky, and you got to be really careful and intentional about it. One of the things that we do is we try to be very open and public and readily available to our community and to our customers. And so, things like a Discord that anyone can drop in and talk to Andrew, or even talk to Jonathan, talk to a C-level, talk to a founder, most times of the day. And that helps, for some people, that's really great. We also do a lot of things. We do a lot of engagement on Twitch. We do a lot of engagement on YouTube, and try to be, as live and as accessible and as human on the other side of the platform as we possibly can. And I think if we do that correctly, we do that honestly, and we just try to be helpful, then we'll get where we need to be on that front.
Yeah. I feel like that piece about authenticity, I'm trying to think of the word, it's not popping into my head right now, but there's this concept that every single person that is part of the DevCycle team, for every customer who's coming in, all of this is a personal relationship. So like having these conversations, our entire team is available on pretty much any channel that you want to go on to. Everybody on our team, from marketing to sales to account management, comes on any of the media that we do. I mean, the fact that there's 3 of us here on this podcast is kind of the way that we run things. Like the more of us that can get out there, like we don't want this to be the Jonathan show or the Brad show or the Andrew show. We want this to be like the DevCycle developer show, and like really make this about that experience of seeing all the faces behind this technology, because we all know like when things go down at the end of the day, you're going to want to engage with a person, and you're going to want to do that in whatever whichever way feels most comfortable to you. And so we've been really spending, I think the last, especially since we came on board the DevCycle team, like the past year has really been dedicated to trying a lot of these different spaces and seeing what works best. I mean, we were in London, England with two of us that were there doing 2 conferences on totally different topics. Because this is a thing we want to see, like, where is the audience? Where are people? What value can we provide to the world outside of just DevCycle and feature flags? And it's awesome because even at both those conferences, at neither of those conferences did either of us talk about feature flags. We were talking about, like, here's our expertise that we have in this area that we want to share with the world. And by the way, we also work for this awesome company who does this really cool thing. And so if you want to come over here and see what we do, like, we want to give you this to kind of allow you to get some insight into what we really want to provide out into the world. So put out good things and good things will come to you.
And I would say it also all wraps back to like our focus for DevCycle, which is actually focusing on the developer experience. Like, we know feature flagging is not a new space. There's a large sort of incumbent provider, and there's like a multitude of open source tooling and internal tools that teams built across hundreds or maybe thousands of companies out there, likely tens of thousands. But we see there's a real market opportunity to like come with a human and developer like experience centered approach that really builds a product that is much more pleasant and easy to use. And the reality of, for teams that are using feature flags, like, it's a tool that you're potentially using many times per day in your workflows. And if any frustrations or things that get in your way in that workflow can really quickly cause you to lose trust. And so that's why, like, our focus for DevCycle is really focusing on that developer experience, and every touch point, from using the dashboard to using our CLI to using our APIs to our IDE integrations, are all have sort of that focus on, like, let's make a great developer experience and a great touch point here that we know folks are going to deeply engage with once they start using our products. So it all kind of ties together and creating a great experience for our customers. And that's how we believe that we can be successful in this like kind of existing market that we know there are large players and large internal tools that we're competing against.
Yeah, that's so developer experience is kind of the way that you're seeing can kind of take you to that to wherever, I guess, becoming the new incumbent.
It's certainly been successful so far, right? It's kind of been the core piece of the puzzle that's really working for us, and so we're really looking to double down on it in a genuine and helpful way.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that I've asked like a million times on this podcast is like, whenever anyone mentions developer experience, it's like if I speak to every dev tool, they'll all mention developer experience, and I'm sure like the incumbents mention it, and I'd be surprised if they didn't anyway. And what is actually the difference between like saying developer experience is important and it like actually really reaching the user and being significantly better than experience than other tools?
That's the $10 million question. You just asked it. Brad, this is all you.
So, I mean, we have pretty strong feelings here, and I think it's important to have conviction when we say things like developer experience. I know internally we don't really talk about developer experience. It's kind of more of an external industry term. But what we talk about more than anything is the quality of our product offering. So when we think about developer experience, we think about the quality of our SDKs, the quality of our API. We want to make sure, like, when you're building and selling to developers, if you do things well, there's an incredible amount of loyalty, and that's wonderful if you can get there. There's also there's a million and one ways to lose trust very quickly. And so when we're talking about developer experience, what we're talking about is ways to make sure and go like not just above and beyond, but above and beyond times 3 to make sure that we are not losing that trust, especially early on in the relationship, and then making sure that we are maintaining it. And so the way that we go about that is not like, it's not enough to say, using our CLI is a delightful experience. That's not a thing. Obviously the industry likes to say that sort of thing. But what we want to make sure is like, that it works as it's expected. It works the first time. It works wherever you are working, and it works bug free. And those are sort of some of the core principles that we operate, and we sort of sum that up to this idea of like, what is the quality of our developer experience, and what is the quality of our developer experience compared to the rest of the market. And a core principle that we operate on is like, okay, let's make sure that we're delivering a developer experience of a high enough quality that we stand out in the broader segment.
Yeah, and I think the biggest change as like myself as a CTO is that it's not about like building like the flashiest, most marketable features. And I think getting that out of my brain was like one of the biggest changes, that like you're not focused on like flashiness and capturing attention. You're focused on like building a great core product that delights more than it frustrates, right? And builds developer trust over time, and really removes those frustrations and pain points and hiccups that every product has, even ours, and really iterating on those core things that you do, and continually iterating on them and making them better over time, and doing that more than sort of working on the next flashy feature that you think will like get you all the attention in the world once you build it, because that's not true most of the time.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, is a really good point. I feel like a lot of it's like, especially I find if you're like it can be really hard to like not create a feature and publish like, here's what we did like this week. Sometimes these change logs that don't, you want to put out this massive feature so that everyone's talking about you on Twitter, like, oh, these guys ship, like, oh my, like
it feels like success, right? It feels like progress, but it's really not that.
We spent months on like a custom like testing system to ensure the consistency and quality of our server-side SDKs across all of our platform is consistent. And like, that's not sexy at all, but it ensures that when we're making changes to those SDKs going forward, like it's consistent across all of the SDKs, and we can ensure some level of quality there. And like, it's those types of things that over time will pay off, but like definitely is not something we're going to market on our public marketing page right away.
Yeah. And I guess like the whole, in a way, like the whole move from Taplytics to DevCycle seems like a kind of like microcosm of this idea that you're just like focusing on making like fewer things really good. Is that kind of like the...
Yeah, we definitely learned a lot of lessons with Taplytics. And like, to be frank, like Taplytics was a pretty successful startup in the grand scheme of things. But we got to a point where I think we had built too many features for the size of our team, and trying to support all those features just became a burden where it was really impacting our growth. And that was a hard lesson to learn, and really helped solidify our convictions around creating a more focused product with DevCycle that more solely focused on individual developer experience of this more narrow but much deeper product than Taplytics was.
I know you were joking earlier, Jonathan, about like, you don't really want to talk about all the testing we've done, but now I can't stop thinking about like a landing page. It's just like DevCycle well tested. Like maybe that's interesting though, right? Like that would stand out. Yeah.
Well, that stuff is open source, so we can point to it, but
yeah. That's, I guess with evidence is like people love it, right? If you could just show like, here's what we did.
This is the effort. This is how we think about building products and how we think about building things for other developers, and it really, I don't know. Maybe there's something interesting there. Mm-hmm. But I like the idea of, maybe there is a way to talk about that publicly that actually is interesting.
I think it relates to how we're sort of approaching open source with DevCycle, and how that also is very different than Taplytics. So with Taplytics, we had patentable things in our SDKs that we had built very early on, and it meant that we could never really fully open source a lot of the SDKs and end software that folks were installing into their applications. And with DevCycle, we wanted to revert that totally. We wanted to make every piece of software that folks are installing in their applications or their servers or their integrations to things like GitHub and things like that. We want all that to be open source, and that's really kind of been a core focus of ours, and has allowed us to be open with how our SDKs are built, how they're tested, what's our process behind all of that, and really led us to supporting this new initiative called Open Feature, which is a CNCF sandbox project, Cloud Native Foundation, the foundation behind Kubernetes, and lots of other projects like Open Telemetry and Argo CD, and a whole suite of amazing open source projects. And Open Feature is kind of a new project that is coming up in the mold of Open Telemetry, where it's a vendor agnostic interface to using feature flags in your code. So instead of using DevCycle's SDKs directly, you use Open Features SDKs that have a kind of an agnostic interface to getting feature flag values. And then you sort of plug DevCycle or really any other provider into that interface. And that's an open source project that we're very excited to support over the long term here.
Yeah. And I mean, like, Andrew, I guess, like, on the ground, like, speaking to so many developers, I'm sure that makes like a big, have you noticed like the conversation is kind of easier when you've got so much of like an open source kind of angle?
Yeah, I think it was so interesting. So we spent last week in Chicago at KubeCon, which was kind of like our like Sweet 16. It was like our coming up party in this world of cloud native. And it was so interesting having these conversations, because folks were like, so how do you feel about open source? And like, why do you do the open source things you do? And we said, this is it. It's the community. It's why this is here. We want to support this. And it just made those conversations about, okay, now tell me about your SaaS platform that I'm going to have to pay for eventually. It was so much of an easier segue that was in there. And then when we focused on things like, yeah, but we have like this usage-based pricing and all of these things that, okay, I can use this now as a developer and make it so easy for you. It's such a door opener in this world. Especially if you're a SaaS platform here, because there are a number of really, really, really good fully open source, self-hosted, feature flag providers that are doing really cool things. And so the question often comes like, why are you not fully open source, or why the SaaS model? And I think sort of saying like, you know what, we do this because we think that with this model, we can offer you the best possible developer experience. We have the resources in the team to be able to do that, but also we really want to support you in being able to do that in the way that you want to through open source. Yeah, it's been such a huge door opener for these conversations with developers, to have them believe that we are truly a developer focused company.
I think it helps most too with the migration discussions, right? Because you can imagine a large code base that's been using feature flags for a while might have hundreds or thousands of flags throughout their code base, right? And if they're going to migrate from an internal tool or a different provider, they're never going to want to do that ever. Like it's such a large pain to overcome in that migration process that they only ever want to do that once, right? And that's where we can point to Open Feature to say, hey, you only need to migrate to using Open Features interface once, and then in the future, if you want to change providers or build an internal tool or something like that, you can do that with Open Feature by plugging in kind of a different provider. And so it's really helped with those conversations and getting those conversations going. There's still obviously a lot of work. Like we've built tools to help our customers convert from one platform or internal platforms to another, and having open APIs and schemas and things like that help enable that process. But that's kind of one of the biggest hurdles for us. Like we know for us, like the biggest hurdle is actually like folks who are using other kind of internal tools or very simple feature flagging things, like using environment variables to start, or using like a a simple file that's served by a CDN or by a database or a Redis or something like that. Like that's where people start, and we know that. And if you start by hooking that up to like open feature, it would make the conversion to a provider like ourselves much easier in the future and reduce that overhead. And so that's the big motivation behind why we want to support it.
Yeah. It's funny how it's I often come on the show and it's like you think that, like, for instance, with authentication, that the biggest competitor is going to be like Auth0, but it's actually just like people doing it themselves. And yeah,
it's always just folks' own database. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we're coming to the end of the time. Before we do kind of a roundup on DevCycle takeaways, I wanted to do like a mini interview within an interview, and we'll keep it to like a minute or so. But I know Brad and Andrew were both working on Battlesnake, which I came across a while back, which was like it's like a place where senior engineers can learn by building difficult things in new languages. And I just wondered if you had any kind of like takeaways of that experience that you've kind of brought with you to DevCycle.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew can talk about this a lot too. But I think that, Andrew and I spent a lot of time working on and building Battlesnake and finding ways to build developer community, build trust within developer communities, and also build what we think of as like safe spaces for senior developers. I think it's hard to be a senior developer in the wild. It's hard to be a senior developer on LinkedIn, for example. That's a very busy and noisy space to be in just always. And so we've learned a lot about what it means to build an honest, an open and authentic developer facing brand. And we've a lot of the reason why we joined the DevCycle team was because we wanted to bring that experience to DevCycle specifically. And so there's an endless amount of things that we learned building Battlesnake. And I think that all of it sort of applies as we go forward. I don't know, Andrew, if you wanted to add anything else to that.
All I was going to say is I think there's something that you don't necessarily think of when you think about building a developer brand, and it's that like developers are like people first, developers second. And so creating experiences that they can share their love of what they do with other people is so huge. Like, I think one of the things that we brought from Battlesnake was like people loved going and watching these tournaments with their families. They would have watch parties at these events. And that carried over to KubeCon last week when we had baby onesies that have like future engineer on them, and they had our little Togglebot logo on them from DevCycle. And they were like the hottest item there, because like, this is the thing, right? Is like, especially when you look at senior engineers, professional engineers, they have families, they're thinking about things outside of just like sitting in a computer all the time. And they want to have this experience. And so much of that, making your life as a developer something that's like of interest or exciting to those around you, I think is such an important thing. And even with a platform that only focuses on putting conditional statements in your code to control whether or not you can see a feature, like there's ways to make that a thing that everybody can experience. And I think that's a big piece of not just making a developer brand fun for the developer and engaging and meaningful and powerful and really well constructed, but also making it something that's accessible to everybody around them as well.
Yeah, that's really good. So developers are people. Let's remember.
I know.
Yeah, developers are people. They have families, they have interests, they have hobbies outside of coding. And not every developer is just learning to code all the time and sitting in a dark room in their basement at 2 a.m. writing code. They're just at the end of the day, they're just people. And so finding creative ways to treat them like people, and treat them like a diverse set of people, goes a long way in help building brand and just helping build trust and loyalty.
And that's it. If you are sitting in your basement, just learning how to, and just coding all the time, we are here for you.
Go for it.
We see you. You are our people too. We don't want you to feel left out. We have things. There's things for you too. And we're here for you as well.
Yeah. I'm not in a basement, but I don't have any windows in my office. So I feel basically kindred with them as well. Jonathan, do you want to round us out with anything that you would advise to a dev tool, or like biggest things you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I think that's that's a good question. I think Brad really summed it up well earlier, that creating a dev tool and focusing on the developer experience is really focusing on that core product and building that relationship with your customers through the quality and the experience of the product that you're providing to them, and focusing on the details, and focusing on those little frustrations, and focusing on your documentation, and how those interfaces are far more important than creating like the flashiest UI or anything like of that sort. That those day-to-day experiences of using your product need to be continually iterated on and refined to create an actually great developer tool and developer experience. And I think that's been our biggest learning so far, and one we're continually working on. And like we certainly aren't, I don't think we'll ever be finished, but that's what we're going to continue to iterate on and improve and listen to our customers of how we can make the best sort of experience for them of how to use feature flags every day. Like we want people using our tools and relying on our tools every day in their workflows. And that's what we're laser focused on.
That's really good. So we've got two great insights there. Focus on the parts of the product that really matter and make them really good. And remember that developers are human and have lives as well. Thank you, Jonathan, Brad, and Andrew for joining. If anyone's interested in checking out DevCycle, devcycle.com, go check it out. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks for having us.